Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. Tuppence Beresford had always believed that the smallest domestic accidents carried secret messages. A button snapping at the wrong moment meant one should slow down. A dropped fork hinted at an unexpected visitor. But a cracking teacup, especially her favourite blue one, felt distinctly like a warning. The sound came suddenly, a thin, decisive tick that sliced through the peaceful stillness of their Chelsea sitting room. Tuppence froze mid-reach as a pale fracture line stretched across the floral glaze like lightning trapped in porcelain. She stared at it with a mixture of betrayal and irritation. "Oh, really?" she muttered, holding the cup at arm's length. "I trusted you more than most people." Across the room, Tommy looked up from the armchair where he had been trimming a newspaper edge with unnecessary precision. "What's happened now? Did the scones turn on you?" "It's the cup," Tuppence said. "It's cracked. I distinctly heard it. All on its own, I'll have you know. I wasn't even being dramatic." "That makes a change," Tommy murmured, but he was smiling. She set the cup carefully on the table, as though it might explode if provoked further. Then she returned her attention to the modest stack of estate sale correspondence she had been organising into neat bundles. She always enjoyed these little treasures, forgotten letters, odd receipts, handwritten notes from the late Victorian era to the near modern day. Most were harmless fragments of other lives, small glimpses into things never intended to be important. But as she lifted one bundle, an envelope slid free and glided across the table like a reluctant confession. It landed beside the cracked teacup. "Oh?" Tuppence breathed. Tommy glanced at her tone. It wasn't her something amusing tone. It was her something is wrong and must be thoroughly examined tone, a tone that generally led to considerable trouble. She picked up the envelope. The paper felt thicker than ordinary stationery, almost parchment-like. The texture carried a faint waxiness, as though someone had sealed it recently despite its faded appearance. When she tilted it toward the lamplight, an embossed crest caught the glow, a crowned lion flanked by two crossed quills. "That's not your usual run of letters," Tommy observed, setting aside the newspaper. "Looks rather official." "It looks old," Tuppence said slowly. "And also not old, quite maddening." She broke the seal, which gave far too easily for something supposedly decades old, and withdrew a single folded sheet. Unfurling it revealed a strange document, part legal statement, part declaration, part riddle. The ink had aged unevenly. Some phrases looked sun-faded, others surprisingly bold. Her eyes caught on several disturbing fragments. Custodial transfer, sovereign implications, to be acted upon in extremis. "What sort of estate sale was this?" Tommy asked. "The sort that shouldn't include secret royal paperwork, I suspect," she replied. "Look here, there's a watermark. HRB, does that mean anything to you?" Tommy squinted. "Her royal blotter? His respected balderdash? No, I can't say it does." Tuppence ignored him, rereading the lines with growing unease. The paper held a low warmth as though someone had handled it recently. Too recently. "Well, we can't keep something we're not meant to have," Tommy decided. "Call the estate sale woman and ask her if this was included by mistake." "Good idea," Tuppence said, already dialing. The woman answered on the second ring. Tuppence explained the discovery gently, but the moment she mentioned the crowned lion crest, the voice on the other end turned sharp. "I have to go," the woman snapped and hung up. Tuppence stared at the dead receiver. "That wasn't suspicious at all," she said dryly. Before Tommy could reply, a knock sounded at their front door. Not a hurried pounding, not a hesitant tapping, a perfectly measured, impeccably polite knock. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a look. "That," Tuppence whispered, "is the sound of someone who knows precisely what they want." Tommy approached the door with the quiet caution of a man who has been married to adventure far too long. He opened it halfway. On the threshold stood a young man in a slightly outdated clerk's suit, pressed but not stylish, functional but not flattering. His hair was neatly parted, though one side quivered in the light breeze. His eyes darted upward, downward, sideways, anywhere except directly at Tommy. "Good afternoon," the young man said, voice unnervingly crisp. "I apologize for the intrusion. I'm here on behalf of the archives. We've been informed that a misfiled property item may have inadvertently reached your possession. Tommy did not move. Which item? I'm afraid I'm not authorized to specify, the young man replied, but its importance necessitates its immediate return. Tuppence stepped beside Tommy, holding the parchment sheet at her side. The clerk's gaze flicked toward it, and his face blanched. You mean this, don't you? She said calmly. He swallowed. It must be retrieved. Tommy's eyes narrowed. And who exactly do you represent? I've already said. The archives. Yes, Tommy said patiently, but which archives? There are so many. The young man hesitated for too long, far too long. Tuppence noticed the sweat gathering at his temple. He wasn't a government official, or at least not one with confidence. His posture was rigid, his fingers twitching as though restraining themselves from reaching for the document. I must insist, he said, though he sounded like someone who had never insisted on anything successfully before. I'm afraid not, Tommy replied, stepping slightly forward. Not until you explain yourself. The clerk's breathing quickened. Please, he whispered. You don't understand. It's not safe. For the document? Tuppence asked. For you, he blurted. That single sentence tightened the air in the hallway. Why isn't it safe? Tommy asked. But the clerk was already backing away. His courage, or whatever passed for it, had evaporated. Without another word, he turned and fled down the steps, nearly tripping in his haste. Tuppence watched him sprint toward the street, disappearing into the late afternoon bustle. Well, she said slowly, that was informative in a thoroughly uninformative way. Tommy closed the door. He's frightened. Terribly so. Whatever this is, he isn't after it for himself. No, Tuppence agreed, smoothing the parchment under her hand. He was terrified of what might happen if he didn't get it back. She laid the document on the table beside the cracked teacup. Side by side, the two objects formed a strangely foreboding still life, a domestic mishap, and an international mystery, touching edges. Tommy folded his arms. We've stepped into something. Tuppence nodded, her expression sharpening with the brisk resolve that had carried them through more than one perilous adventure. And someone, she murmured, believes this paper matters. She looked again at the crowned lion, at the crossed quills, at the faded and freshly bowled ink. Then she looked at the door where the young man had stood trembling. Perhaps, she said softly, matters enough to kill for. The crack in the teacup gleamed under the lamplight, thin, sharp, and whispering of trouble yet to come. Tuppence was already halfway to the door before Tommy could say, "At least let me get my coat." She swung it open and stepped onto the front step, scanning the direction the young clerk had fled. The street hummed with the easy, late-morning rhythm of Chelsea, the rattle of a milk cart, a shopkeeper tugging up his awning, a group of schoolchildren debating whose turn it was to carry the football. And yet the clerk, nervous, pale, and unmistakably out of his depth, had evaporated into that perfectly ordinary bustle as if the pavement itself had opened and swallowed him. Tommy joined her, tugging the door shut behind them. Well, he's either terribly quick on his feet or terribly good at hiding. Neither quality comforts me, Tuppence replied. She took a few purposeful steps down the walk, then stopped, crouching suddenly. A small rectangle of paper lay half-tucked under the iron railing. She plucked it free and held it up. A bus ticket, she said. Stamped only minutes ago. Charing Cross Road. Tommy raised a brow. Do we take that as a helpful clue, or the world's most obvious trap? Tuppence slipped the ticket into her handbag with the determination of someone who had already decided. It's not a trap, she said. It's a breadcrumb. It could be bait. She gave him a bright, maddening smile. Then let's pretend to be fish. 5 minutes later, they were headed toward the bus stop. Charing Cross Road was at its most lively by the time they arrived, the sort of midday energy that made it feel like an unbroken thread tying together booksellers, tourists, theatre-goers and dreamers hoping to find forgotten first editions. Tuppence inhaled the scent of old paper and printing ink with satisfaction. If I were a nervous clerk with too much to hide, she mused aloud, I would flee somewhere familiar, somewhere lined with dusty shelves and easily ignored corners. Anywhere I could blend in, Tommy agreed, glancing around. Shall we start with the bookshops? The first few proprietors reacted with mild confusion when shown the crest. One man adjusted his spectacles and declared it A theatrical prop from a children's pageant, probably worth sixpence. Another dismissed it as continental pretension, which felt like an opinion rather than information. But in the fourth shop, a narrow, dimly lit store whose aisles were so tight Tommy had to turn sideways to navigate, an elderly bookseller reacted very differently. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before he composed his features into polite blankness. "No," he said firmly, giving the crest only the briefest glance. "Never seen that before." Tuppence's attention sharpened. It wasn't the denial, it was the slight tremor in his voice, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he immediately turned from them and hurried into a curtained back room. "I believe," Tuppence said softly, "he's making a telephone call. Shall we go after him?" "Not yet. He meant to hide it. Let's discover who he's calling first." They moved toward the curtain, but before they reached it, a voice behind them interrupted. "You'll want to stop that." They turned to find a woman watching them from the shop entrance, a woman with precise posture, a perfectly tailored violet suit, and an expression that suggested she found most people mildly inconvenient. Her accent had the clipped refinement of someone who spoke several languages, but preferred not to waste words in any of them. "You have something you should not," she said quietly, "and you're waving it around as though advertising for a matinee performance." Tuppence crossed her arms. "And who might you be to warn us?" "A concerned party," the woman replied. "There are papers in this world that remain undisturbed for very good reason." Tommy held her gaze. This one didn't remain undisturbed. It was in an estate sale bundle, handed to us quite innocently. Innocent hands rarely stay clean. The woman's eyes held something like pity. "If I were you, I would put the document in a drawer, lock it, and forget I ever touched it." "And if we don't?" Tuppence asked. The woman hesitated. Her next words were quiet, not threatening exactly, but weighted with the sort of truth no sensible person dismissed lightly. Some monarchies endure only because their ghosts are kept quiet. Before either Beresford could reply, she stepped backward into the street and vanished between two pedestrians, gone as swiftly as she'd appeared. Tommy exhaled slowly. "Friendly." "She tried to be," Tuppence said. "That's what worries me." Their search took them further down the street, where typewriter shops and print shops dotted the row between bookshops. One in particular stood out, a long, narrow storefront with a sign so faded it merely hinted at the word press. Inside, rows of typewriters sat silent, though a faint humming suggested the larger machines in the back were running. Tuppence nudged Tommy. "Too many typewriters, not enough customers." "And the door was already slightly open," Tommy added. They slipped inside. The air smelled faintly of oil and hot metal, the scent of machines that had been pushed too hard for too long. And there, near the back, they found him. The young clerk stood facing a heavier-set man, whose stance and clipped gestures suggested military habit. The argument between them was sharp and heated. "I did what you asked," the clerk said, voice cracking. "I delivered it. I followed instructions. I didn't betray anyone." "You should have brought it straight here," the older man snapped. "I tried. They opened the door before I was ready, and I panicked." "You panicked." The man leaned in dangerously close. "Do you have any idea what that will cost us?" The clerk's eyes darted toward the front of the shop and landed directly on Tommy and Tuppence. His face drained of what little colour remained. "Not again," he whispered. Then louder. "I didn't betray anyone. They forced me." He dashed toward them, thrusting a folded page into Tuppence's hand. It felt crisp, recently typed, edges sharp. "Take it," he gasped. "Wait, what is—" Tuppence tried, but he was already racing toward a narrow side exit. The older man cursed and lunged after him, knocking over two typewriters as he gave chase. Tommy started toward the door, but Tuppence's instincts screamed otherwise. "Tommy, wait!" Behind them, the printing presses roared to life. The metal clatter filled the building, a deafening cascade of rhythmic pounding that made the walls tremble. And underneath that thunderous noise, a single gunshot, a sharp, unmistakable snap muffled by machinery. Tuppence grabbed Tommy's arm. The presses kept clattering, drowning everything except the heavy silence that followed. Tommy swallowed. "I think," he said grimly, "that wasn't aimed at paper." Tuppence tightened her grip on the folded page in her hand, her pulse quickening, her senses sharpening. Whatever the clerk had tried to give them, he had died for it, or worse, killed for it, and the secret he carried had just become theirs. The moment they stepped back into the quiet of their Chelsea sitting room, the folded page the clerk had thrust into Tuppence's hand seemed to grow heavier, as though infused with the last desperate breath of the man who had given it. Tuppence set it on the table with the same care one might give an unexploded device. Tommy pulled the curtains halfway closed, muttering, "If ever a piece of paper looked guilty, it's that one." "It's trembling," Tuppence said, leaning over it. "It's not trembling," Tommy corrected. "You are." She shot him a look, then unfolded the page. At first glance, the typed sheet appeared to be nothing more than a short personal letter, perhaps a note meant for a friend or an aunt. But something about it grated immediately. Words were oddly capitalized, commas placed in ludicrous positions, full stops scattered where no sane writer would put them. Tuppence tapped the page lightly. "This isn't a letter. It's a message disguised as one." "Let me guess. Another estate sale surprise." "Don't tease. Look here," she said, pointing to the first line. The capital letters spell transfer, and here, compromised. Tommy leaned in. "Well, that's cheery." They spent several minutes reading in silence. Each time one of them spotted a pattern, an extra dash, a misplaced dot. The message grew clearer. The punctuation marks, when read sequentially, formed a surprisingly neat diagram. Tuppence tilted the page 90 degrees. "It's a map," she breathed, "a meeting point. And if I'm not mistaken, the Royal Paper Conservatory is exactly where this curve indicates." Tommy whistled softly. "The one in Kensington, the place with all the seals and scrolls and very serious archivists?" He sat back. "And our friend the clerk wanted us to have this." Tuppence nodded, though her eyes were on the paper. Not wanted, needed. Before either could speculate further, Tommy straightened. "We still need to report the gunshot." "Of course, anonymously." They made the call from the hallway telephone, exchanging only the barest facts. By the time they returned to the print shop, a police cordon had formed outside. Officers were questioning the shop owner, whose expression hovered between irritation and fear. Tommy and Tuppence chose to linger near the pavement's edge where they could observe without drawing attention. They didn't have to wait long before a constable approached them. "You two again?" he said, recognition flickering. "Someone said you were inside earlier." Tommy offered a polite smile. "We heard a disturbance, came to check. What happened?" "We're determining that," the constable said, but his eyes were far too focused on Tommy and Tuppence, as though they themselves were the anomaly rather than a missing clerk and a mysterious gunshot. "Best move along now." "Certainly," Tuppence replied sweetly. "We wouldn't want to be in the way." But as they walked, Tommy murmured, "Did he seem interested in the missing man at all?" "Barely," Tuppence answered. "He was interested in us." They didn't speak again until they reached a quieter street. Then Tuppence pulled the original parchment from her bag and compared it to the coded sheet. "Tommy." "I know," he said. "They're linked." The more they studied the documents, the more alarming the truth became. References to custodial transfers, sovereign implications, carefully worded statements that hinted at royal authority, and now transfer compromised. Tuppence rubbed her temples. There was a small kingdom. I read about it years ago. Its archives burned during a coup of sorts. A family dispute turned ugly. Some claimed the wrong heir was crowned. "And you think this relates?" "I think someone wants the truth erased, or revealed, depending on the side." Tommy opened his mouth to respond, but the doorbell rang. 3 sharp notes. Familiar. Tuppence brightened. "Albert!" Albert was dressed in his usual slightly rumpled suit and looked as though he had run half the length of London to reach them. His hair stuck up like an exclamation mark, and he carried an envelope tucked beneath one arm. "Don't tell me," Tommy said. "You're here to ask us to give up a document we haven't finished reading." Albert stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind him. "I'd like to say yes. It would make my job simpler. But the truth is messier." He dropped the envelope onto the table beside the parchment and the coded sheet. "I'm in private security now. International arrangements, heritage protection, that sort of thing. And I've had reports all morning about certain items resurfacing." "Royal items?" Tuppence asked. "Heritage papers," Albert said carefully, "linked to old scandals. The sort of thing nations prefer forgotten. Tommy folded his arms. And we found one. You found something, Albert corrected. 2 foreign groups are looking for these papers. One group believes the documents will clear their prince's name. The other group believes the documents will destroy them. Both are dangerous. One is ruthless. The other is simply desperate. Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. And both think we have something explosive. Albert nodded. If I were either of those groups, you'd be my first stop, and probably my last. Comforting, Tommy muttered. Albert sat at the table and opened his envelope. Inside were several clipped reports, a map, and a list of known agents associated with each group. Tuppence skimmed quickly. These names, she murmured, some of them are diplomats. Some pretend to be, Albert said. Some are ex-military. Some are museum curators with questionable loyalties. And one, he tapped a name halfway down the list, is an archivist, with a reputation for destroying things quietly. Tuppence shivered. The people chasing that clerk, were they from one of these groups? Most likely, but the fact the clerk approached you first suggests he didn't trust them, or feared them. Tommy dropped into a chair. We can't hand over the parchment, not yet, not when we don't understand it. That is absolutely what you should do, Albert insisted, before you end up on the wrong end of a diplomatic scandal, or worse. Tuppence looked softly sympathetic. Albert, darling, since when have we ever done what was sensible? Albert sighed. I was afraid of that. Tommy moved the lamp closer, illuminating both documents at once. Shadows deepened on the table, pooling between the lines of ink as though the words themselves were absorbing the light. They worked through the papers again, line by line, symbol by symbol. Connections emerged. Dates, though faded, overlapped with the timeline of the old royal dispute Tuppence had half remembered. Phrases matched those used in coronation oaths in obscure monarchies. The watermark, HRB, seemed to reference a hereditary registry bureau that no longer officially existed. At last, Albert spoke. If this document is genuine, he said, it could delegitimize an entire royal line. Tuppence exhaled slowly. Then it explains why someone is willing to kill for it. Albert rubbed his forehead. I'm telling you, hand it over. Tommy shook his head. Not yet. We need context. Who wrote this? Why? And why hide it only to leave clues leading back to it? They may not have meant to, Albert said. The clerk, he may have panicked, or been ordered to deliver it, or tried to deliver it to the wrong people. Any option is bad. Or, Tuppence said, he wanted it to reach someone who would understand. Albert snorted. And you believe that someone is you? Yes, she said simply. I do. Tommy placed a hand over the parchment. We've faced worse than royal paperwork. Albert stood abruptly. Then promise me one thing. Don't go anywhere without telling me first. Don't follow any more stray bus tickets or mysterious maps. Tommy and Tuppence exchanged the sort of silence that was technically not a lie, but certainly not a promise. Albert noticed. You won't, will you? Tommy smiled. We'll be cautious. That's not the same, Albert replied. He left reluctantly, pausing at the doorway. Be careful. Both sides think this is a matter of national survival. That makes everyone unpredictable. The door shut behind him. For a long moment, neither Tommy nor Tuppence spoke. Then Tommy said softly, This isn't just treasure hunting, Tuppence. She met his gaze, eyes bright with the spark of a mystery too intricate to resist. No, she said, this is dynastic dynamite. A smile tugged at her lips. Then we'd better handle it carefully. The first thing Tuppence noticed upon stepping into the Royal Paper Conservatory was the silence. Not the gentle, scholarly silence she expected, but a taut, expectant hush, like a room holding its breath. Even the air felt strained, as though stretched thin over something the eye could not yet see. The second thing she noticed was the attendant with ink-stained fingers watching them far too closely. He stood rigid behind a polished desk, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, revealing smudges of faded black ink that looked as permanent as tattoos. His eyes moved with the alertness of a sentry, following them step by slow step across the marble floor. "Good morning," Tuppence said brightly, because nothing unsettled a suspicious man more than unapologetic cheerfulness. "We have a rather curious inquiry." The attendant swallowed. Curious? Tommy offered a polite nod. We're hoping to speak with someone about a crest, a crowned lion with crossed quills. We thought the conservatory might know something about its provenance. At the sight of the crest, lightly drawn on the parchment Tommy unfolded, the attendant's face drained of colour. "One moment," he whispered. He vanished through a side door with surprising speed, leaving Tommy and Tuppence standing in a cavernous hall filled with glass cases, old paper, and the faintest perfume of dust and age. "Well," Tommy murmured, "that went well." "He ran," Tuppence said. "Men only run like that for 3 reasons: fire, overdue rent, or secrets." "Let's hope this is not rent." Before Tommy could reply, footsteps echoed sharply from the side corridor. A man emerged, stern, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that came from decades of bending over documents and refusing to allow anyone else to touch them. His tweed coat hung perfectly, his spectacles sat low on his nose, and his expression was that of a man who had just discovered someone eating biscuits near a 17th-century vellum. "I am Dr. Mallory," he said, extending a hand neither of them wished to shake. "You have something I should not be seeing." "That sounds ominous," Tuppence replied cheerfully. Mallory did not smile. "Show me." Tommy handed him the parchment. The doctor's hands, though steady at first, began to tremble as he held it up to the light. He turned it over, examined the edges, traced the crest with a fingertip as though it might burn him. "This is impossible," he murmured. "I often find impossible things extraordinarily possible once you stop refusing them," Tuppence said. Mallory ignored her. "This crest was erased from official heraldry records over a century ago. Stricken, removed, forbidden." "Forbidden by whom?" Tommy asked. Mallory hesitated. "Royal archivists, some of whom—" His voice dropped to a whisper. "Vanished." Tuppence leaned closer. "You said forbidden. What does that mean in your world of catalogues and scrolls?" "It means," Mallory said, lowering the parchment as though it had grown heavier in his hands, "that a document bearing this symbol should not exist, and if it does, then someone took great pains, dangerous pains, to preserve it." Tommy frowned. "Why would someone erase a crest from history?" Mallory gave a humourless laugh. "To protect a throne, to protect a lie, or both." Tuppence felt a tingle race across her arms. "Doctor, what kind of document is this?" Mallory inhaled deeply, steadying himself. "A commission, a transfer of authority, a legal instrument so powerful it could unsettle nations if ever validated." He pressed the parchment back into Tommy's hands. "This must be destroyed." Tuppence arched an eyebrow. "Destroyed?" "Yes," Mallory insisted. "The longer it survives, the more danger it draws, and the two of you have no idea what danger you've invited." Tommy opened his mouth to question further, but a sudden crash shattered the atmosphere. Shouting erupted from the main hall. Mallory spun around. "What on earth?" The shouts grew louder, followed by the violent scraping of metal against tile. Tommy seized Tuppence's wrist and pulled her behind a heavy oak table, just as a group of masked intruders stormed into the conservatory, kicking open doors and overturning display cases. Paper flew like distressed birds. Shelves toppled, glass shattered in a glittering rain. The conservatory, moments ago a sanctuary of stillness, became a battlefield. "Get down," Tommy hissed. Tuppence crouched beside him, heart pounding. She peered around the table's carved edge. The intruders moved with unsettling purpose, heading not for random displays but straight toward the private archive wing, where the most valuable, restricted papers were kept. "Their target isn't us," Tommy whispered. "That's not comforting," Tuppence replied. Before she could say more, a familiar figure stumbled into view, pale, frightened, darting between toppled book carts. The clerk, the very same clerk who had run from their Chelsea doorway. His eyes darted wildly as a masked intruder closed in on him. The clerk backed against a display case, trapped. Tuppence acted before thinking. She grabbed the nearest heavy item, a ledger the size of a paving stone, and hurled it with remarkable accuracy. It struck the attacker's shoulder, knocking him off balance. "Go!" she yelled. The clerk scrambled toward her, breath ragged. He clutched something crumpled in his fist, a scrap of paper perhaps. "Tuppence!" Tommy warned, but the clerk slid to his knees beside her, thrusting the paper into her hand with desperate urgency. "Look for Lion," he gasped. "The betrayal, sealed there." His words dissolved into a strangled cry as two intruders seized him by the arms. One dragged him backward while the other slammed a fist into his stomach. "Wait," Tuppence shouted. But they hauled him away, disappearing into the chaos. The shouting intensified. Mallory tried to intervene, only to be shoved aside. A display cabinet shattered behind Tommy, showering them with dust and fragments of ancient glass. After another minute, long enough to feel like an eternity, the intruders retreated. Their footsteps thundered down the corridor. A side door slammed, then silence swept over the conservatory once more. Except this silence was worse than the earlier one. This silence trembled. Tommy stood, offering Tuppence a hand. "Are you all right?" "I should be asking you that," she said. Mallory approached, shaken but uninjured. "This is precisely why that parchment must be destroyed," he said, voice cracking. "People will kill for it." Tommy's jaw tightened. "Which is exactly why we can't hand it over blindly." Mallory stiffened. "You misunderstand. I don't want it for myself." "Then why," Tuppence asked, "are you so determined to take it from us?" Mallory's mask cracked. For the first time, raw fear flickered in his eyes. "Because a royal family has everything to lose if that parchment's truth comes to light. Everything. And families with everything to lose often have nothing to spare." Tommy stepped closer, calm but firm. "We'll hold on to it." Mallory's voice rose in alarm. "You're meddling in dynastic matters far beyond. That ship sailed yesterday," Tuppence said. "We're committed." Mallory's shoulders sagged, defeated. "Then may God help you." He walked away, trembling. Tommy placed a gentle hand on Tuppence's back. "Let's go before he tries again." They stepped out of the conservatory's large wooden doors into the soft afternoon light. Traffic passed, oblivious to the chaos within. A woman walked her dog. A small boy fed pigeons. Ordinary life resumed with cruel indifference to secrets that could topple kings. Tuppence unfolded the scrap the clerk had slipped her. One word stood out, written in hurried strokes. "Lion." She exhaled. "Tommy, if everyone wants it buried, this secret must be enormous." Tommy nodded grimly. "And we," he said, "seem to be the only ones refusing to bury it." The river looked deceptively peaceful. From their modest hotel room overlooking the Saône, Tuppence stood at the small balcony railing, watching the late afternoon sun scatter across the surface in trembling shards of gold. Below, Lion moved with its usual elegant rhythm. Cyclists cutting across narrow lanes, waiters balancing trays of steaming cups, a violinist tuning his instrument near the river's edge. It was all so charmingly normal that one might forget the city had once sheltered fugitives, conspirators, and, if the coded message was to be believed, a missing prince. Tommy emerged from the washroom, adjusting the unfamiliar collar of the alias he'd adopted. Mr. Thompson, a name he found suspiciously dull. "You look thoughtful," he said, seeing Tuppence's distant gaze. "Lion is beautiful," she replied, "the sort of place where secrets could slip between the stones." "That's poetic," Tommy said, "and unsettling, which I suppose is fitting." Tuppence turned from the balcony. "Do you have the parchment?" "In its clever hiding place," Tommy said, patting the side pocket of his coat. "A pocket no one ever checks because even I forget it exists." "Then we're ready," Tuppence said. They left the room, descended the creaking stairwell, and stepped into the gentle hum of Lion's old quarter. The former royal townhouse stood only a few streets away, tucked discreetly beside a refurbished theatre. Once a refuge for displaced aristocrats, it had long since transformed into a museum, showcasing a forgotten lineage of minor royals, those whose names never made it into grand textbooks, but whose scandals whispered through history like persistent ghosts. The entrance hall smelled of lemon oil and old stone. Tuppence immediately felt that familiar sensation, a sense that eyes were watching, not with distrust, but with curiosity. A figure approached, Etienne Morel, the museum's curator. He was a handsome man of about 50, with an elegant moustache, smooth French manner, and an enthusiasm that seemed both genuine and ever so carefully controlled. He greeted them with warm professionalism and an almost theatrical bow. "Bienvenue, monsieur et madame," he said. "It is an honour to welcome visitors from London." "We're here doing a bit of historical research," Tuppence said. "I've read that a minor prince once sought asylum here." Etienne's eyebrows lifted as though delighted by their obscure knowledge. Ah, yes, yes, Prince Adrian, a tragic figure, brilliant young man, caught in the wrong political storm. And the stories that he vanished? Tommy asked. Etienne's lips twitched, a charming smile masking something tighter beneath. Exaggerations, monsieur. Romantic fiction. The prince left Lyon to join family abroad. He lived quietly after that. But people adore a tragedy more than a retirement, no? He motioned them toward the grand staircase. Please, allow me to show you the archives display. They followed him past portraits, letters, and gilded trinkets that hinted at wealth now dissolved. Etienne narrated with gentle humour and historical flourish. Tuppence watched him closely. His hands fluttered expressively when he spoke of royal education, of diplomatic ties, of elaborate banquets. But when the conversation shifted, ever so cautiously, to succession disputes or court betrayals, his fingers stilled, his words tightened. So Prince Adrian was never involved in inheritance matters? Tuppence asked as they paused before a portrait of a delicate-featured young man with dark, thoughtful eyes. Involved? Etienne repeated, choosing the word carefully. He was adjacent. Adjacent? Tommy echoed, unable to hide his amusement. Etienne gave a polite shrug. Royal families are storms. Some members are at the centre, others remain on the edge, avoiding the lightning. Adrian, I think, preferred distance. Before Tuppence could challenge the vague remark, a young assistant appeared, a nervous-looking man whose expression oscillated between alarm and apology. Monsieur Morel, he said breathlessly, there is a matter, urgent. Etienne's smile froze with unnatural stiffness. Excuse me, he said abruptly to Tommy and Tuppence. We will continue later. He followed the assistant down a side corridor, their hushed voices trailing behind them. Tommy watched them disappear. That was a bit sudden. He was afraid we'd asked the wrong question, Tuppence said, or rather, the right one. They spent the remainder of the afternoon wandering Lyon's alleys, absorbing the city's rhythm while letting their minds circle around Etienne's evasiveness. They discussed possible motives: loyalty, fear, bribery, scandal. Each theory seemed plausible, none felt complete. By evening, the sky shifted into a warm indigo, streetlights glowed amber, and the city's aroma turned richer with the promise of dinner. They stopped at a small cafe, ordered simple plates, and tried to appear like ordinary tourists rather than people entangled in an international mystery. It was Tommy who noticed her first. Across the street, standing near a lamppost, was a tall woman in a tailored coat, her posture straight, her gaze sharp, her presence unmistakable. The woman in the violet suit. Tuppence did not turn her head. How long? Since we left the museum, Tommy murmured. Then we should give her a chance to say something. As though summoned by their thought, the woman stepped across the street and approached them. She removed her gloves with meticulous movements and stopped at their table. Good evening, she said. Bonsoir, Tuppence replied sweetly. You're following us. I prefer monitoring, the woman said. May I sit? Tommy gestured to the empty seat. Depending on your intentions. She sat gracefully. My name is Claire Dubois, French Diplomatic Archives. Tuppence arched a brow. And you just happened to be in Lyon at the exact moment we arrive. I didn't happen to be, Claire said. I was told you were coming. Her tone carried no hostility, only weary inevitability. Claire continued, You have obtained a document, a dangerous one, and you must listen carefully. It is a fabrication. If it's a fabrication, Tommy said, why do so many people want it? Claire hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the passing crowd, because lies, when believed, can be more destructive than truths. Tuppence studied her face, refined but tense, expression guarded but not hostile. She sensed something unspoken simmering beneath the diplomatic facade. You're not trying to deceive us, Tuppence said softly. You're trying to protect someone. Claire's lashes trembled, only slightly, but enough. Tommy leaned in. The missing prince. He produced the document, didn't he? Claire's composure fractured like a cracked veneer. She glanced away, inhaled sharply, then looked back with resignation. I cannot speak openly, but yes, the prince may have created the paper, not to betray his family, but to shield someone else, someone still alive. Tuppence felt a shiver of revelation. Then he didn't disappear. No, Claire whispered. He vanished. There was a difference, a profound one. Tell us who he protected, Tommy urged. I cannot. Not here. Claire stood abruptly. But listen, foreign agents are closing in. You must leave Lyon immediately. We can't, Tuppence said. We're missing too many pieces. Claire's voice dropped to a razor-thin whisper. Then be careful. Some truths were buried to save lives. Digging them up may cost your own. She left without waiting for a response. Later that night, as the clock in their hotel room chimed softly, a letter slipped under their door. Etienne Morel's handwriting. Urgent. Come to the museum. Alone. Tuppence, Tommy said. This smells like a trap. Everything smells like a trap, she replied. That's what makes it interesting. They walked quickly through dimly lit streets, Lyon quieter now, shadows stretching long across cobblestones. When they reached the museum gates, they found them ajar. Not reassuring, Tommy murmured. Inside, the building was dark except for a faint glow in the archival wing. They followed the light, stepping carefully past display cases and velvet ropes. Then they saw him. Etienne Morel lay slumped on the floor beneath a shattered glass case. His breathing was shallow, his face pale, eyes flickering open only weakly when they knelt beside him. Etienne, Tuppence whispered. What happened? He struggled to speak. They were looking for the prince's records. Tommy scanned the room. Who? Etienne lifted a shaking hand and pointed toward the broken glass. A message had been scratched, etched sharply with a diamond-tipped instrument, onto the remaining pane. Tuppence read it aloud, voice tightening. The prince never left, and neither will you. The words gleamed coldly in the fractured glass. Tommy exhaled. Someone isn't warning us. No, Tuppence whispered, pulse thrumming. Someone is inviting us deeper. Etienne's fingers curled weakly around Tuppence's wrist. Find him, he rasped, before they do. And then his hand fell limp. Tuppence and Tommy exchanged a solemn, electrified look. Whatever tragedy had been buried decades ago was beginning to unearth itself, and they were now standing at the very edge of its excavation. The museum felt wrong the moment they stepped back inside. Not frightening, not dramatic, just wrong, the way a room feels after someone has slipped out of it in a hurry, leaving behind a faint disturbance in the air. The lights were dimmed, casting long, pale strips across the floorboards. The only sound was the soft mechanical hum of the preservation units, steady and patient as a heartbeat. Tommy knelt beside Etienne Morel. He's breathing, he said, shallow, but steady. Tuppence knelt opposite him, smoothing back the curator's hair with gentle fingers. We should get him help. We should, Tommy agreed. Neither moved, because something else was moving. A faint sound cracked the stillness, a delicate, irregular scratching. It skittered beneath the floor like fingertips brushing wood, soft enough to question, distinct enough to dread. Tuppence froze. Tommy, she whispered, hardly daring to breathe. That sounds like someone crawling. The scratching grew clearer, then abruptly stopped. Silence. A silence so complete it pressed against their eardrums. Tommy slowly straightened. We're not alone. Before they could investigate, the museum's front doors slammed open. Heavy boots thundered through the main hall. A bright torch beam swept across the displays, followed by the clipped command of an officer directing people left and right. Police. A moment later, an inspector stepped into view. Stocky, grey-templed, jaw clenched with perpetual impatience, his badge glinted against his overcoat. Inspector Remord, he announced. No one leaves. Tuppence bristled. We didn't intend to, she said. That remains to be seen, Remord replied. You were found at the site of an attack beside an injured man, after hours, without permission, and... His gaze sharpened. You are known to French intelligence as meddlers. Tommy put on his most practiced diplomatic smile. We prefer concerned tourists. The inspector didn't smile back. You possess a document that has drawn dangerous attention. Tuppence's spine stiffened. Who told you that? Before Remord could respond, another presence entered the hall. Swift, poised, and precise. Claire Dubois. She walked straight to the inspector and murmured something in his ear. Ramord's gaze flicked between her and the Beresfords with visible annoyance. Then, with a grunt, he stepped aside. "Very well," he muttered. "Take them. They're your responsibility." Claire gestured sharply. "This way. Now." Tommy and Tuppence followed her through a side corridor, the inspector's glare burning between their shoulder blades as they retreated. Once they were out of earshot, Claire exhaled, tension seeping from her posture. "I cannot talk long, but listen carefully. You're about to be detained, officially because you interfered with a crime scene, unofficially because you hold something far more valuable." "The parchment," Tuppence said. "Yes," Claire replied, "and you must not let them take it." "Charming," Tommy murmured. "But why are they so eager?" Claire hesitated. "Because this museum once contained secrets that were removed." "By whom?" Tuppence asked. "By the royal family," Claire said. "During political unrest, a chamber was built here, a bolt hole for the young prince in case the worst occurred. I believe it still exists." Tommy frowned. "A hidden chamber, under the floorboards." Claire nodded. "I believe that is what you heard." Tuppence's eyes widened. Then someone could still be inside. "Or someone was using it recently," Claire said. "Either way, we cannot search with the police here. They would seize everything." Tommy glanced back toward the hall. "Then we return tonight." "Quietly," Claire said. And quickly. The hours crawled by. They returned to their hotel under the pretext of answering questions, then were released with warnings that felt more like threats. Tuppence paced for a full 10 minutes while Tommy, seated on the edge of the bed, watched her with amusement. "You're wearing a hole in the carpet." "I'm thinking," she snapped. "I can tell. You only pace when your thoughts are outrunning your patience." She stopped. "Someone crawled under those floorboards, Tommy. Someone alive. Someone hiding." Tommy nodded. "Then we follow the trail." At near midnight, when Lyons Street softened into near slumber, they met Claire behind the museum. She carried a lantern and a thin roll of tools. "Through the staff entrance," Claire whispered. They slipped inside with barely a whisper of sound. The preservation units hummed softly, casting faint shadows that danced across paper-lined walls. The atmosphere felt even more strained than it had earlier. "Where do we begin?" Tommy asked. Claire lifted the lantern. "With the tapestry." They reached the far corner of the gallery, the least remarkable section, filled with minor sketches and family trees. There hung a faded tapestry depicting a regal lion, paw raised, mane flowing, flanked by 2 quills, the exact crest of the mysterious document. Tuppence inhaled sharply. "There it is, the forbidden crest." Claire nodded. Hidden in plain sight. She slid her fingers beneath the tapestry's edge. "Help me lift." Together they raised it, revealing a wooden panel beneath. Claire pressed her ear to it. Silence. Tommy knelt, running his fingertips along the grain. "Look here, faint grooves. This panel slides." He retrieved the smallest tool from Claire's roll, pried gently, and the wood shifted with a soft click. A square trapdoor lifted enough to expose the dark below. "We're going in," Tuppence said. Tommy sighed. "Of course we are." They descended a narrow ladder into a cramped underground chamber. The air was thick with dust and paper decay. Their footsteps stirred small whirls of it into the lantern light. The space was barely larger than a nursery closet. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old toys, a wooden horse, a stack of children's books in faded bindings, a tin soldier missing one arm. A small bed, little more than a cot, stood in the corner. "This was a child's refuge," Tuppence whispered. "Prince Adrian's." Claire nodded, her face strained with emotion. "My family told stories of it. A hiding place during riots. A last resort." Tommy gently nudged a small trunk buried beneath fabric scraps. The lock was intact but corroded. "This looks promising." Claire knelt beside him. "Open it." With careful pressure from one of Claire's tools, the lock gave a reluctant snap. The lid creaked open. Inside lay bundles of papers tied with twine and a small leather journal. Tuppence reached for the journal with reverence, opening to the first page. The handwriting was delicate and slanted, almost too elegant for a child. "Prince Adrian," she murmured. "It's his." They read together as the lantern flickered. "If I fall, let this tell the truth. The Duke grows bolder. The lies multiply. They think no one sees. They think I am still a child. Tuppence exhaled sharply. Claire whispered, Adrian suspected his uncle, long before the coup. Tommy turned the page. He seeks power not for the crown, but for himself. He will shift the succession line. He will frame those who know. I fear he will do worse. Further entries describe the prince smuggling documents, forging certain seals to keep them from falling into the Duke's hands, and using the conservatory's secret chamber as his sanctuary. He knew, Tommy murmured. He knew he was in danger. He thought he might be killed, Claire said quietly. Then they reached the final entry, truncated mid-sentence. If they discover the parchment, the true one, if the transfer... The ink ended abruptly, as though the pen was torn from his hand. Tuppence closed the journal gently. He was taken, or he fled. Either way, he never finished. And the Duke he feared, Tommy said, is still alive. Claire's expression hardened. Alive and powerful. Tuppence replaced the journal. We need to take this. Claire hesitated. The police. Mustn't find it, Tommy said. We agree with you. After carefully securing the journal and selected papers, they climbed the ladder back to the main gallery. But the moment the trapdoor clicked shut behind them, a sound rolled across the gallery. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They were not running. They were not searching. They were waiting. Claire extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Tommy leaned close, whispering, Someone knew we'd return. Tuppence's pulse pounded in her throat. Then someone knows what we've found. The footsteps paused, just beyond the tapestry, waiting, listening, and then, with a scrape against the floorboards, they moved again. Slow, purposeful, hungry. Tommy tightened his grip on Tuppence's hand. We need to move, now. The footsteps adjusted, as if responding to his whisper, and began to follow. The name rose from the prince's journal like a serpent uncoiling. Duke Stéphane Armand. Every few pages his title slid into the margins, sometimes circled in frantic strokes, sometimes half erased as though the prince feared even writing it aloud. Tommy read the entry for the fourth time, brow furrowed. He wasn't just a relative, he murmured. He was the power behind the throne. Tuppence touched the edge of the page, feeling the indent of the prince's hurried pen. And he's still alive, which makes him more than history. Claire Dubois stood by the hotel window, arms folded tightly. He is alive, she said, and aging has not softened him. His estate is outside Lyon, a fortress in all but name. Tommy raised a brow. And you think we can just walk in? Claire handed them 2 invitations embossed in gold. Tomorrow evening, he hosts a charity gala. The guest list is long enough that no one will scrutinize unfamiliar faces, if you keep your questions subtle. Tuppence slipped one of the invitations into her handbag. Subtle, she echoed. We can do subtle. Tommy gave a grim laugh. We can attempt subtle. The estate appeared late the next afternoon like a shadow cast across the countryside, a sprawling manor of white stone and dark shutters, perched atop a gentle rise. Rolling lawns stretched outward in immaculate symmetry, broken only by clusters of sculpted shrubs trimmed into perfect spheres, and sweeping gravel paths that glimmered under the late sun. It would have been peaceful, if not for the armed guards stationed at discreet intervals near the hedges and doors. Classical music floated through the air, violins weaving effortlessly with cellos, creating a serene facade that clashed with the tension humming beneath it. Tuppence adjusted the soft teal shawl draped over her shoulders. It's beautiful, she said lightly. And suspicious, Tommy replied. The perfect combination. They blended into the stream of elegantly dressed guests. Laughter rose in the garden, champagne glasses clinked, conversation rippled like well-tuned orchestration. But beneath the surface there was something else. The staff's darting glances, 2 quick corrections of posture, the guards' constant sweeping of the grounds. Everyone here looks like they're pretending nothing's wrong, Tuppence murmured. Which, Tommy said, usually means everything's wrong. They hadn't been there long when a steward approached them. Monsieur and Madame Thompson? He asked. Yes, Tommy replied, adapting to their aliases. The Duke wishes to welcome you. Tuppence exchanged a look with Tommy. Already? The steward nodded. He is eager to meet guests from England. They followed him across the garden toward a terrace overlooking the grand fountain. There, standing beneath a pergola draped in climbing roses, was Duke Stephen Armand. He cut an imposing figure despite his age, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved in hard lines and eyes that had once inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. His silver hair swept back immaculately. His tailored suit conveyed wealth without vanity. He smiled as they approached, revealing perfect, polished composure. "Bienvenue," he said, voice deep and resonant. "It is a pleasure to welcome friends from across the Channel." "The pleasure is ours," Tuppence replied with polite warmth. But the Duke's handshake was too firm, his gaze too probing, as if weighing their worth in an instant. "You enjoy Lyon?" he asked. "Immensely," Tommy said, "especially its history." The Duke's smile tightened. History is a double-edged sword, beautiful to study, dangerous to disturb. Tuppence returned the smile sweetly. And yet archives seem to survive on disturbance. The Duke's eyes flickered, and that flicker told Tuppence everything. So she continued casually. "We visited a museum recently. Former royal townhouse, fascinating place, full of relics and forgotten documents." The Duke's posture stiffened by a fraction. "Ah, yes, that place." He waved a hand. "A charming collection, but little of true importance." "You'd be surprised," Tuppence said lightly. "Some archives hold more truth than expected, especially those involving old family records." Tommy suppressed a cough to hide a grin. For the first time, the Duke broke eye contact. Then he smiled again, too smoothly. "Perhaps you would enjoy a private viewing of my own archives, in the library." Tuppence felt the shift immediately. He was switching tactics, containment instead of avoidance. "We would be delighted," she said. The library doors shut behind them with a sound too soft to be safe. The room itself was grand, floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound volumes, the smell of old paper thick in the air, and a long table polished to a mirror shine. A pair of antique chandeliers cast warm light across the room, though their glow did little to soften the tension coiling beneath the surface. The Duke gestured to two chairs. "Please, sit." Tommy and Tuppence remained standing. The Duke clasped his hands behind his back. "You came for something specific. A document, perhaps, one that has caused much commotion recently." Tuppence didn't flinch. "We came for answers. The document seems to provide more questions." "Because," the Duke said, voice velvet smooth, "it is a fabrication." "So we've heard," Tommy replied. The Duke's gaze sharpened. "You should hand it to me before its lies cause trouble." Tuppence tilted her head. "Trouble for whom?" He stepped forward, jaw tightening. "For my family, for your country, for all of Europe." "And why," Tuppence asked gently, "should a harmless fabrication trouble anyone?" His mask slipped for a heartbeat. "It is not harmless," he snapped. "It is poison." "Interesting choice of word," Tommy murmured. Tuppence withdrew the prince's journal from her handbag, just the copy they had made, never the original, and flipped to a particular page. "He wrote about you often," she said. The Duke froze. "What?" She read aloud, voice calm as moonlit water. "The Duke's betrayal shall be hidden until the true heir returns." The words echoed through the library like a bell tolling. The Duke's expression transformed. Fury, fear, and something darker flickered through his eyes. He stepped closer, voice low and tremoring. "You have no idea the damage you risk." "Then enlighten us," Tommy said. The Duke's fist slammed onto the table, rattling an inkstand. The prince was unstable. He saw conspiracies everywhere. His writings are delusions, nothing more. "Is that why he vanished?" Tuppence asked quietly. "Or was he made to vanish?" He inhaled sharply. There it was, the truth exposed by silence. His voice dropped to a whisper laced with venom. "You meddle in affairs far beyond your comprehension. Do you think you can wander into a dynasty's secrets without consequence? You are naive, foolish." Tommy took a step forward. "We've been called worse." The Duke glared. "There are intelligence operatives posted in this estate, loyal men, men who would not hesitate to detain you, or worse." "That's comforting," Tuppence said. "Truly." The Duke pointed toward the door. "Leave now, before I change my mind." But a sudden shuffle sounded in the corridor outside. Urgent footsteps, then a soft knock. The library door cracked open. Claire Dubois stepped inside. Her expression was composed, but her eyes blazed with inner conflict. "Your Grace," she said coolly, "you have guests expecting you in the Rose Pavilion." The Duke's lips thinned. "They can wait." "No," Claire said with unexpected firmness. "They cannot." Her gaze flicked to Tommy and Tuppence, a silent warning. The Duke straightened. "Fine. I will return shortly. Do not move." He swept from the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Claire strode forward. "You must leave," she hissed. "Quickly." He meant every word of that threat. Tommy nodded. "Which direction?" She motioned to a side door hidden behind a velvet curtain. "This passage leads to the service corridor. Follow it to the kitchens, then out through the delivery entrance." Tuppence paused. "Claire, why are you helping us?" Claire's expression softened just enough to reveal fear and resolve. "Because the Duke is lying, and because what Adrian wrote was true." Tuppence squeezed her arm. "Then we won't waste your help." They slipped through the side door into a narrow, dimly lit corridor that smelled faintly of polish and old stone. Voices echoed behind them, guards adjusting their positions, the Duke returning sooner than expected, orders spoken harshly in French. "We need to hurry," Tommy whispered. They navigated twists and side passages until a sliver of cooler air signaled the direction of the kitchens. The hum of conversation and clatter of dishes masked their steps. A startled kitchen maid saw them but merely nodded, fearful of anyone crossing the Duke. Through the delivery entrance they stepped into the night air. Behind them, light blazed from the library's upper window. A figure stood silhouetted inside, motionless, rigid, watching. The Duke. His outline radiated hatred sharper than any blade. Tuppence's breath caught. "He knows we won't stop." Tommy took her hand. "No," he said. "He fears we won't." The wooden gate of the monastery opened with the slow, reluctant groan of something unused to interruptions. A robed monk, lantern in hand, peered out at the trio with mild bewilderment, as though visitors at this hour were either lost or misguided. Behind him the courtyard lay still, no traffic, no voices, only the faint rattle of wind chimes carved from old prayer beads. Tuppence leaned slightly toward Tommy and whispered, "This place looks like it's allergic to excitement." "Which means," Tommy murmured back, "we've probably brought enough for all of them." Claire Dubois stood poised between them, but her usual composure held a strained undertone. Her eyes tracked every shadow, every nook where someone might hide. This visit meant more to her than she'd admitted. The monk bowed his head. "Welcome," he said in careful English. "What brings you to St. Augustin?" "Research," Tuppence replied gently. "Historical inquiries." The monk blinked, uncertain. "We do not keep archives for the public." "But you did," Claire said softly, stepping forward. "For a short time, many years ago." The monk's face tightened. "I do not understand." "Yes," Claire said quietly, "you do." The exchange pulled the air taut. Tommy stepped in diplomatically. "We're looking into the movements of certain royal individuals who may have sought sanctuary here decades ago, specifically Prince Adrian." At the mention of the name, the monk's lantern trembled slightly. "We had no such guest," he said too quickly. Tuppence felt the shift. Lies always made the atmosphere do strange things, as though truth were a living thing trying to break through. "We'd be grateful," she said gently, "to look at your old guest records." "There are none," he insisted. "But there were," Tuppence murmured, her eyes drifting toward a nearby building, an annex with mismatched stonework and a strangely fresh scent of paint. "And something tells me you've been tidying up recently." The monk stiffened. Claire's jaw clenched. They had found the right place. The monastery's interior was quiet to the point of discomfort. Small wooden benches lined the walls, worn smooth from years of prayer. Candles flickered in alcoves, casting honey-coloured halos on rough-hewn stone. Yet beneath the peaceful veneer, every detail felt curated, too orderly, too polished, as though something had been recently hidden rather than preserved. The monk led them down a hallway. "Most of our rooms are closed to visitors." "Yes," Tuppence murmured. "We noticed." She brushed her fingers lightly across a wall. Fresh paint, very fresh. the kind that hadn't fully dried, producing a faint chemical note beneath the incense. Tommy pointed to a doorway sealed with a wooden board and bearing a paper sign, "Under renovation, do not enter." "Curious," he said. "Renovations in a monastery where nothing else seems to have changed since the 12th century. "That room is not safe," the monk said quickly. "Structural issues." Claire stepped closer. "Open it." Fear broke across the monk's face. "I cannot." "Then I will," Claire said. Before the monk could protest, Tommy took hold of the board and pulled. The nails resisted for a moment, then gave with a sharp metallic squeal. He and Claire pushed the door inward. The room beyond smelled of dust and old paper, and something else. Occupation. Tuppence's breath caught. A small cot lay in one corner. A stack of letters sat bundled on a makeshift table. A half-finished painting rested on an easel. A royal crest, incomplete. The lion rendered in bold strokes but missing its crown. Clothes were draped over a chair, boots neatly placed beneath it. This wasn't an abandoned storage room. It was a living space, recently abandoned. Claire stepped inside with a trembling inhale. Her hand moved to her throat as she surveyed the room, eyes softening with a grief too intimate to hide. "He lived here," she whispered. Tommy frowned. "Prince Adrian?" Claire nodded once painfully. "He stayed here after faking his death. My family helped hide him. The Duke hunted anyone connected to my mother. Adrian would never let the Duke find me, or her." Tuppence's heart tightened. "Claire, you never said he was your uncle." "I couldn't," she said. "If anyone knew the connection, it would lead back to the rest of us. He hid to keep us safe." She lifted one of the letters, hands shaking. The envelope bore only initials, A.A. Adrian Armand, Prince Adrian. Tommy scanned the room slowly. "He didn't leave long ago. The blankets are still warm." Tuppence crouched beside the easel, touching the edge of the unfinished crest. "He ran," she said, "and he didn't take everything." Beneath the cot, she spotted a folded scrap of paper. She reached for it. A note, handwritten, short. "Too close. Must move. They found the old channels. I will contact you when safe. A." Claire wiped her eyes. "He's alive." Tuppence stood, handing her the note, and running. That was when she heard it. A muffled thud from somewhere beyond the corridor. Then another. Tommy stilled. "Did you—" Gunfire, not loud, suppressed but unmistakable. Claire's eyes widened. "They're here." Panic rippled through the monastery like a dropped stone. Shouts rose from the outer courtyard. Boots hammered stone. A monk yelled something frantic in French. Then another gunshot cracked, sharp enough to rattle the windows. "Move," Tommy said. Claire grabbed the prince's letters and the unfinished painting, stuffing them into a satchel. Tuppence took the lead, scanning the hall. "Back the way we came is blocked. We need a rear exit." Claire pointed to another corridor. "Through the vineyard cellar, there's a door leading to the outside path." The sounds of pursuit grew closer. Multiple footsteps, quick and practiced. Tommy ushered them forward. "Go!" They burst into the cellar staircase. The door slammed behind them, muffling footsteps above. They descended quickly, the scent of earth and fermenting grapes growing stronger. Tuppence reached the bottom first. Barrels lined the stone walls, casting long curved shadows. The air was cool, damp, whispering of the decades this place had sheltered wine and secrets. They hurried toward the far door. Claire fumbled with the latch, hands trembling. Behind them the upper door splintered. Tuppence spun, heart hammering. A masked operative descended the stairs, face obscured, steps swift. "Claire!" Tommy barked. The latch clicked. The door swung open to a sliver of moonlight. "Go!" Tuppence shouted. They sprinted into the vineyard, rows of bare grapevines reaching like skeletal hands beneath a starless sky. The earth shifted underfoot, uneven but familiar enough to guide them through the rows. Shouts erupted behind them. Another suppressed shot fired, thudding into a wooden post inches from Tuppence's head. Tommy grabbed her arm. "This way!" They ducked low, weaving between vines. Claire clutched the satchel to her chest, breath ragged but determined. "We must reach the footpath. There's a narrow trail leading down the hillside." But then Tuppence stopped abruptly. A silhouette moved ahead of them, a figure standing still among the vines. Tall, lean, slightly stooped as though bearing an invisible weight. clothes unkempt yet dignified, and the exact profile sketched in the prince's childhood drawings, Prince Adrian. Before any of them could speak, the figure recoiled at the approaching footsteps behind Tuppence and Tommy. He raised a hand in warning, a silent plea. Then, like a ghost dissolving into the night, he darted sideways into the darkness of the next vineyard row. "Adrian!" Claire cried out. "Claire, no!" Tommy grabbed her arm before she could chase. More masked operatives spilled into the vineyard. 3, maybe 4. Searching, sweeping flashlights sliced across the vines. Tuppence pulled Claire backward. "He's alive, but he wants us to run." "He can't keep running forever," Claire whispered. "Tonight he must," Tommy said, "and so must we." They reached the hillside path just as the operatives surged deeper into the vineyard, chasing shadows. Tommy, Tuppence, and Claire fled down the trail, the monastery bell starting to toll above them, monks signalling danger, calling for help, or perhaps mourning the secrets cracking open after decades. The hillside swallowed them in darkness. They didn't stop running until the monastery lights were far behind them, mere fireflies in the night. Only then did Claire collapse onto a low stone wall, the satchel clutched tightly in her lap. Tuppence sat beside her, breathing hard. Tommy stood watch at the edge of the road. Claire's voice broke into a whisper. "I saw him. I truly saw him." Tuppence placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's alive, Claire. We know that now." "And he's being hunted," Claire said, wiping her eyes. "For decades he hid to protect us, but now he's alone." Tommy stepped toward them. "Not anymore." Claire looked up. "You mean to help him?" "Yes," Tuppence said softly, "because if betrayal built this mess, then truth must dismantle it, and Adrian is the key." Tommy nodded. "We're in this now, all the way." Claire exhaled, a mixture of fear, hope, and gratitude. "Then we must find him before the Duke's men do." Tuppence looked toward the silent monastery, its towers dark, its secrets echoing through the night. And before he disappears again, London greeted them not with rain or gloom, but with a jarring normalcy that felt almost indecent after the monastery gunfire. Buses rumbled past as though dynasties weren't collapsing in France. A vendor near Victoria Station argued over the price of apples. A dog barked impatiently at a pigeon. Life carried on with unbothered indifference. Tommy exhaled. London does have a talent for making international conspiracies feel like badly scheduled errands. Tuppence slipped her arm through his. "Then let's run the errand properly." Claire followed them closely, her expression taut with contained urgency. She had slept little on the journey home. None of them had. The prince, her uncle, her blood, was alive, alone, hunted, and leaving crumbs just small enough to vanish if the wrong hand swept the table. They met Albert inside a discreet cafe tucked beneath a bookshop. He rose as they entered, waving them to a corner booth shielded by a row of tall ferns. "Blimey," he whispered as he sat. "You look like you've been chased across Europe by the Knights of the Round Table." "Close," Tommy said. "Masked operatives instead of knights, but points for enthusiasm." Albert didn't smile. He slid a folder across the table. "This is what I've got on the Duke." The moment Tuppence opened it, the world narrowed to the stark black and white pages inside. Military reports, intelligence memos, illicit communications, and in the middle of it, a photograph of Duke Stefan Armand in his youth, standing beside high-ranking officers, all wearing expressions carved from iron. Albert tapped a memo with his fingertip. The Duke played puppet master decades ago. He engineered a coup, quiet, controlled, and lethal. People who stood in his way, officers loyal to the rightful line, died. Assassinations masked as accidents. Tommy read another page, and he blamed it all on the prince. "Exactly. Adrian tried to expose him," Albert said. "He gathered evidence, witness signatures, confessions, testimonies, but before he could deliver it to the Royal Council, his allies vanished. Literally. Every witness listed here died within months." Tuppence felt a chill. "Convenient." "Fatal," Albert corrected. Adrian realized the Duke meant to eliminate him next, so he ran. Claire's voice cracked. "And disappeared to protect us." Albert glanced at her, softening. He didn't just vanish. He hid pieces of his evidence across Europe. Letters coded into children's drawings, ciphers disguised as spiritual reflections. He hoped that someday someone would understand. Tommy leaned back. We've been following a breadcrumb trail left by a hunted man. And now, Albert said, lowering his voice, the next clue puts you in the lion's mouth. He opened another file, a gleaming modern building, a symbol etched in silver, the name, the Armand Global Foundation. Tuppence stiffened. Armand, as in, the Duke's son, Albert said, chairman, powerful, untouchable. The foundation funds humanitarian work, but the basement houses a private archive he controls personally. Tommy frowned. And you think the Duke stored evidence there? I think, Albert said grimly, that the Duke keeps trophies, secrets, blackmail material, and if he's hunting the prince again, that basement holds the reason why. Claire stared at the photo, jaw clenched. Then we go. Albert hesitated. It's a fortress during events. Security everywhere. Cameras. Guards. Tuppence closed the folder. Perfect. So many people watching the obvious entrances means no one watches the corners. Tommy grinned. I do like your optimism. I prefer to call it strategy. The Armand Global Foundation headquarters rose like a steel cathedral above the Thames. Its glass facade reflected the city lights, glowing with the promise of progress and philanthropy. Tonight, a lavish conference illuminated the interior, a swirl of diplomats, donors and ambassadors moving through the atrium in shimmering waves. Tuppence stood at the base of the marble staircase, dressed in a sleek evening gown borrowed from a friend in theatre costuming. The gown alone made her invisible among the glittering crowd. Claire, in a tailored diplomatic suit, moved toward security with her credentials ready. Her posture radiated authority. Her family history may have been buried, but her professional rank was unquestionable. Tommy adjusted his bow tie. Now, which of us goes first into the dragon's den? You, Tuppence said sweetly, handing him a staff badge she'd charmed from an unsuspecting volunteer earlier that evening. Basements suit you. Ah, yes, Tommy replied. My natural habitat. Claire handed him a security pass. The private archive has biometric locks, fingerprint and code. The code changes daily, but I spotted an analyst writing today's sequence on a schedule sheet. Last 4 digits, 1954. Symbolic, Tuppence murmured. The year the coup began. Fittingly dramatic, Tommy said. Right. Time to make myself unpopular. Tuppence gave his arm a brief squeeze. Do hurry. We'll create distractions, but distractions only last so long. Tommy nodded, then slipped into the service corridor behind the gala staff. Claire approached the main security desk, posture flawless. Claire Dubois, diplomatic liaison. I need to speak with your director regarding the archival partnership proposal. The guard blinked at her credentials, startled into respect. Of course, madame. Let me... She began speaking in rapid French. The guard fumbled, flustered, reaching for a communicator. Perfect. Tuppence slid away from the main hall, weaving through servers carrying trays of canapes. She smiled at a maitre d', charmed a junior manager, and exchanged pleasantries with a board member's spouse. Each encounter timed to block sightlines and create mild confusion. Security tightened around Claire. Attention shifted, and in that brief window, Tommy reached the basement stairs. The archive's biometric lock gleamed like polished bone. Tommy swiped the stolen staff badge, then pressed his thumb to the scanner. It beeped, unimpressed, and flashed red. Fair enough, Tommy muttered. Can't win every time. He typed the code Claire provided. 1954. The lock clicked. He slipped inside. The private archive was colder than the rest of the building, temperature controlled, silent except for a distant hum. Shelves stretched the length of the room, filled not with books but with boxes labelled in meticulously neat handwriting. Some were innocuous. Finance records, 1998, 2005. Infrastructure approvals, 2010-2013. But others... Tommy stopped at a shelf marked simply, Private, S.A. Stefan Armand. He opened the first box. Inside lay hundreds of pages, letters, memos, coded communications. A folder fell open to reveal a photo of Prince Adrian, older now, bearded, startled by the camera as though he'd just realized he was being hunted again. Tommy's breath caught. So recent. He scanned the next page, a list of operatives assigned to track a target through rural France. He flipped another file. Signed affidavits from officers affirming the Duke's involvement in unauthorized military actions, statements that contradicted every official record. "These are the originals," Tommy whispered. "The prince wasn't lying. He had everything." A shadow stretched across the box. Tommy froze. He knew that voice before it spoke. "Well," Duke Stefan Armand said softly behind him, "curiosity really is a British vice." Tommy turned slowly. The Duke stood framed in the doorway, flanked by two operatives in black. His expression was carved from contempt and satisfaction. Tuppence and Claire must still be upstairs. He was alone. "Finding my archive was impressive," the Duke said. "Stupid, but impressive." Tommy kept his voice calm. "Your son knows these documents exist, the basement of his philanthropic empire hiding proof of your treason." The Duke's eyes flashed. "My son knows nothing, and he never will." He stepped forward, gesturing to one operative. "Burn them, all of it." The operative strode toward the shelves. "No," Tommy said sharply. "You destroy this, and every lie you built collapses. People already suspect." "People suspect nothing unless I let them," the Duke snapped. "This," he gestured broadly, "this archive is a reminder of mistakes. Mine, and Adrian's, and now yours." Claire's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Stop." She stepped inside, fierce, composed, and unflinching. The Duke's eyes widened. "You." "Me," Claire said. "The niece you tried to erase." Tommy's heart pounded. She had followed him. She had taken the risk knowingly. "Claire," the Duke said, tone dropping into a chilling rumble, "this is not your world." "It became my world," she said steadily, "the moment you hunted my family, the moment you made Adrian disappear." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Your mother should never have married into the line. She brought weakness, sentiment." "She brought integrity," Claire said softly. "Something you never understood." Her eyes burned, not with tears but with truth. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a slip of old paper. "The last line in Adrian's hidden writings," she said, "the one he saved for the moment you tried to silence him." The Duke bristled. "You don't?" She read it aloud. "Betrayal thrives only where truth fears to speak." The room stilled, utterly. The Duke lunged, not gracefully, not strategically, desperately. He seized the document in her hand, ripping it, only for Tommy to block his next swing. The Duke staggered, enraged. The operatives tensed, and then sirens wailed outside, dozens of them. Claire lifted her chin. Albert called in every contact he had, intelligence agents from both governments. "They're here." The Duke's face contorted, fear, fury, and defeat warring beneath his skin. "You've destroyed everything," he hissed. "No," Claire said, "you destroyed yourself." The doors burst open. Officers flooded the corridor. Tommy exhaled as the operatives dropped their weapons and the Duke, trembling with rage, was forced to his knees. But before officers could secure him fully, a sudden shout erupted from the far end of the corridor. Officers flooded the corridor, shouting orders, guns raised, radios crackling with overlapping commands. But none of them reached Tommy's ears as sharply as Claire's muffled cry disappearing into the night. Tuppence grabbed Tommy's arm. "We need to move, now." Agreed. Before any officer could detain them for questioning or protection, they slipped down a side staircase, moving fast but carefully enough not to draw attention. The gala upstairs throbbed with oblivious chatter. Donors discussed global initiatives, clinking champagne glasses, unaware that a Duke-turned-traitor had kidnapped a diplomat beneath their feet. Tommy muttered, "We have minutes before every exit is sealed." "Then let's make them count." They reached the street just as a patrol car screeched into motion and sped away. No Duchess, no Claire, no clue which way the Duke had gone. Tuppence closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. "Claire knows we'd follow." "And that she'd need to leave breadcrumbs," Tommy said, scanning the pavement. Then he saw it, a faint, hurried scratch on a lamppost, a tiny mark, 3 diagonal strokes crossing a fourth. Tuppence smiled tightly. Her old field sign for left route, clever woman. They ran. London at midnight was a tapestry of movement. Taxi lights sweeping across buildings, distant trains rumbling, muffled nightclub music blooming and fading as they passed intersections. The city breathed, unaware and indifferent. Tommy and Tuppence wove through it with purpose, their steps sharp against the pavement. Another mark appeared near a postbox, this time a scrawled circle with a slash. "Straight ahead," Tuppence translated. They followed the path into narrower streets where old warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, and the air smelled faintly of the river. The Thames whispered somewhere beyond the buildings, its presence felt even before seen. Tuppence slowed. Claire worked for intelligence before diplomacy. She wouldn't leave signs unless she truly believed we'd find the hem before the Duke noticed. Tommy nodded grimly. So, we'd better not disappoint her. A third mark waited on the corner of an abandoned fish market, an upward arrow etched into dust. Beyond it stretched a deserted lane sloping toward the river. At the end of that lane stood a warehouse with shattered windows and rusted loading doors. A faint light flickered inside. "Found you," Tommy breathed. They approached quietly, ducking beneath a half-collapsed frame. Inside, the cavernous space was a mix of shadows and weak light from a single hanging bulb. Dust curled in the glow like silent smoke. Crates littered the floor, some toppled, others stacked like barricades. Voices reached them, one strained, one trembling with fury. The Duke and Claire. Tommy pressed a finger to his lips. They crept closer, weaving between crates until the scene unfolded above them. The Duke had taken Claire onto a raised gantry overlooking the warehouse floor. His grip was firm, but his eyes were wild, possessed less by triumph and more by desperation. "You ruined everything," he snarled. "All these years, decades, holding the line, preserving the order, and now it collapses because of you, because of your mother, because of that wretched prince." Claire didn't cower. "My uncle tried to save the family from you." "He tried to destroy it," the Duke roared. "His lies would have torn apart the monarchy. I kept stability. I kept our legacy alive." "At the cost of truth," Claire said. "At the cost of innocent lives. You don't understand power," the Duke spat. "But you will. Tonight, this ends." He reached for a pistol tucked beneath his coat. Tuppence's heart lunged upward, but before she could act, a new voice echoed through the rafters. "You made the same mistake 30 years ago, Stefan." The sound was soft, but it carried with uncanny strength. The Duke spun, eyes widening as a figure stepped from the shadows of the gantry's far end. Gaunt, greyed, wearing a coat frayed at the sleeves, but standing tall, Prince Adrian. Claire gasped. "Uncle!" Adrian raised a hand, fragile but firm. "Don't move, Claire." The Duke's lip curled. "You're alive." "Your disappointment is touching," Adrian replied softly. "You hunted me without pause. You killed loyal men. You erased my mother's name from the records. And still, the truth outlives you." The Duke aimed the pistol at him. "You think you've won because you crawled out from whatever gutter you hid in." Adrian stepped closer into the circle of lamplight. His face bore the map of a life spent running, cheekbones sharper than memory, eyes fatigued but fierce. "I preserved 2 copies," he said quietly. "One hidden outside Europe, one smuggled into England years ago." Tuppence felt Tommy stiffen beside her. "The documents you sought to destroy," Adrian continued, "were never the only evidence. You cannot silence truth with fire." The Duke trembled, not with age, but with crumbling control. "You think exposing me will restore your claim," he hissed. "The council won't accept a ghost." "I don't want the throne," Adrian said. "I want justice." The Duke's rage tipped into madness. "Then you will die for it," he charged. Tommy bolted. "Now," he hissed. He and Tuppence dashed up the gantry stairs just as the Duke lunged toward Claire with the pistol raised. Claire ducked instinctively, but there was nowhere to run, not with the railing at her back. Tommy threw himself at the Duke, tackling him sideways. The pistol clattered across the metal floor, skittering dangerously close to the edge. The Duke fought like a man decades younger, wild swings, brute strength fueled by hatred. Tuppence reached Claire, pulling her away from the struggle. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Claire replied breathlessly. "Help your husband." Tommy grappled with the Duke along the narrow walkway, the metal groaning beneath their weight. Adrian limped forward, trying to reach them, but years of hiding had taken their toll. His pace was slow, unsteady. Tommy managed to pin the Duke momentarily, but the older man twisted violently, grabbing a crate beside him. He heaved it toward the railing, smashing it open. Papers flew out, dozens, hundreds, fluttering like wounded birds. Instantly, Tommy recognized the seal on them, the royal crest. "These are the originals," Tommy said. The Duke snarled, "and they die with me." He snatched the nearest page, an affidavit bearing multiple witness signatures, each testimony damning him beyond redemption. Before Tommy could react, the Duke ripped the document. "No!" Claire cried. He grabbed another, tearing it too. Adrian's voice cracked like a whip. "Stefan, stop!" The Duke laughed, a broken, feverish sound. "You preserve 2 copies? I destroy them all. You will have nothing, no proof, no voice, no legacy." He lunged for the remaining papers scattered near the edge. Tommy sprang. Their bodies collided again, wrestling dangerously close to the drop. The gantry creaked, bolts straining under the force. The Duke struck Tommy hard in the chest, sending him reeling, but not falling. Tuppence, unable to reach them, shouted, "Tommy, your left!" Tommy twisted just as the Duke drew a knife from his sleeve, a thin, wicked blade glinting under the warehouse bulb. It arced toward Tommy's ribs. Tommy blocked it with his forearm, pain blazing, but used the momentum to shove the Duke backward. The Duke stumbled. His heel hit the torn papers beneath him. He slipped. For a moment, the world slowed. The Duke's eyes widened, a flash of fear, disbelief, and fury all tangled together, before gravity, not vengeance, claimed him. He fell. The echo reverberated through the warehouse, then stopped, and with that silence, decades of fear evaporated. Officers stormed the building seconds later, boots pounding against the concrete. They swarmed the gantry, calling for medics, shouting commands, securing the floor. Claire gripped the railing, shaking, not from fear, but from release. Adrian reached her first, pulling her into a trembling embrace. "My brave girl," he whispered. "You did everything I hoped someone someday would." Claire buried her face in his shoulder. "I thought you were dead." "I almost was," he murmured, "more times than I can count. But tonight, I live because of you." Tuppence watched the reunion with misted eyes. Tommy joined her, pressing a hand to his bruised arm. "You all right?" she asked softly. "Mostly," Tommy winced, "though one day I'd like to solve a national crisis without someone trying to stab me." Tuppence smiled, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. "One day, perhaps, but not today." Police officers approached. "Sir, Madame, we'll need your statements." "Of course," Tommy said. "But first," he gestured toward Adrian. The prince straightened, shoulders squared as though reclaiming a weight he'd once abandoned. "I am ready," he said quietly. "Take me in. I will testify to everything." Claire grabbed his hand. "You're doing the right thing." "The only thing," Adrian replied. As officers escorted him gently toward the exit, Tuppence noticed something glinting near the edge of the gantry, a fragment of parchment blown beneath the railing. She retrieved it carefully. The royal seal gleamed faintly beneath dust and tears in the paper. "This," she whispered, "was the key all along." "The parchment you found," Tommy said softly, "the one that started everything." Tuppence held it a moment longer, then slipped it into an evidence envelope handed to her by an officer. Claire approached them, her voice thick with gratitude. "You saved him," she said. "You saved our entire history." Tuppence shook her head. "No, he saved himself. We only followed the path he left." Claire smiled, weary but genuine. "Then you followed it brilliantly." Tommy slipped an arm around Tuppence. "Well, perhaps we make a good team." "Perhaps," Tuppence teased. "We always have." The warehouse doors opened, letting in the distant glow of blue lights and the murmur of officers coordinating statements. As they stepped outside, the Thames shimmered quietly nearby, steady, patient, carrying secrets and endings with equal grace. For the first time in weeks, the night felt still. Not peaceful exactly, but resolved. The dynasty had been wounded, battered, nearly buried. But the truth had survived, and the royal papers of betrayal, those fragile scraps that had crossed decades and continents, had finally spoken. The weeks that followed felt strangely suspended, as though time itself were catching its breath. News travelled slowly at first, whispered through diplomatic channels rather than splashed across newspapers. A royal council convened behind guarded doors. Intelligence agents drafted classified reports. Lawyers combed through documents once thought lost to fire and treason. And quietly, very quietly, the truth emerged, blinking into the light after 30 years in the dark. Prince Adrian, long declared dead, publicly cleared. The Duke, formally denounced. Succession lines redrawn with dignity rather than spectacle. A small European nation rebuilt its fractured history in silence, choosing to heal rather than dramatize. For once the world behaved sensibly, and Tommy and Tuppence Beresford returned to Chelsea. Tuppence stood in the kitchen holding 2 teacups before her, like a jeweller comparing gemstones. One was new, white porcelain, delicately painted with sprigs of forget-me-nots. The other was the old one, cracked in a perfect traitorous line across the rim. "This crack," she said, turning the damaged cup so it caught the light, "changed the course of European history." Tommy looked up from the morning paper. "It also ruined a perfectly good cup of tea. That part often gets overlooked." Tuppence snorted. "You have no romance in your soul." "Oh, I have romance," Tommy said. "I just prefer it without gunfire, foreign operatives, and running across vineyards in the dark." She swapped the cracked cup for the new one, studying its sturdiness. "It's not as pretty," she admitted. "You'll grow accustomed," Tommy said. "And if not, I'm sure you'll find us another potentially nation-toppling antique at the next estate sale." Tuppence sighed dramatically. "A woman breaks 1 teacup, and suddenly she's an international threat." Tommy folded his newspaper. "To be perfectly fair, you didn't just break it. You cracked it with enough force to summon a document that half of Europe was prepared to kill for." "That is not how archaeology works," Tuppence said, setting the new cup firmly on the counter. "But I appreciate the mythology." The doorbell chimed with crisp punctuality. "Albert," Tommy said, rising. Only Albert rang a bell like that, polite enough to be proper, firm enough to sound like undercover news. Tommy opened the door to find Albert beaming with a grin he almost never wore, unless something was going splendidly or catastrophically. "Morning," Albert said, stepping inside. "Am I interrupting tea-based philosophical reflection?" Tuppence called from the kitchen. "Only mildly. You're forgiven if you bring pastries." "I brought intelligence briefings," Albert said. Tommy groaned. "That is decidedly not a pastry." Albert set a small polished wooden box on the table. "But this," he said, "might sweeten the disappointment." Tuppence approached, curiosity brightening her eyes. The box was exquisitely carved, its lid embossed with a small crest, lion and quills, the emblem they had seen in so many dangerous situations, except now it seemed peaceful, dignified, free of menace. "For you," Albert said simply. Tuppence lifted the lid with reverence. Inside lay the prince's restored journal, bound in fresh leather, its pages pressed flat and preserved. A small handwritten card rested atop it. "For the ones who followed the truth when others feared to look. A.A." Tommy let out a low whistle. "A royal thank you. Discreet, tasteful, and hopefully not incriminating." Albert chuckled. "Your involvement remains officially non-existent. A handful of people know you were involved, and each of them values their own career far too much to breathe a word." Tuppence ran her fingers gently along the journal's edge. "He deserves to be remembered properly." "And he will be," Albert said. "But probably not in headlines. His family has chosen a quiet restoration. Stability, not spectacle." Tommy nodded approvingly. "The best kind of restoration." Albert straightened. "Well, now that I've delivered your royal gratitude, I must get back. My department is drowning in paperwork. Turns out documenting 30-year conspiracies isn't as simple as it sounds." "You have our sympathy," Tuppence said. "No, you don't," Albert shot back, smiling, "but I appreciate the illusion." He tipped his hat and left as briskly as he'd arrived. The Beresfords settled into an unusually calm routine. Afternoons filled with gentle activities, walking near the river, browsing bookshops, worrying only about everyday nuisances like laundry and grocery lists. It felt almost suspiciously serene. Tuppence occasionally opened the journal, reading one entry at a time. She never rushed. The prince's handwriting still carried tremors of fear, flashes of hope, and the weight of secrets he'd borne for half a lifetime. One afternoon, she read quietly while Tommy prepared tea. He wrote about Claire a great deal, Tuppence said. Tommy paused mid-pour. Admiringly or protectively? Tuppence smiled faintly. A bit of both. He feared the Duke might try to erase her mother's line entirely. That's why he kept running. Courageous man, Tommy murmured. And very alone, Tuppence added softly. Tommy placed her teacup before her. New, sturdy, slightly less charming. Not any more. Claire's got him back now. Tuppence nodded. Imagine losing someone for so long only to find they'd been protecting you all their life. That, Tommy said, is the most noble form of stubbornness I've ever seen. Tuppence sipped her tea. Do you think she'll visit? Claire? Absolutely. People never forget the couple who helped rescue their royal uncle and topple a decades-old conspiracy. Tuppence raised a brow. I thought our involvement was entirely secret. Tommy grinned. Officially. A knock at the door settled the question. Tuppence opened it to find a courier in embassy uniform holding a sealed envelope. Delivery for Mrs. Beresford, he said. She signed for it and tore the seal. Inside was a letter handwritten on crisp diplomatic stationery. Dear Tommy and Tuppence, there are some debts that remain unspoken, yet deeply felt. My family is safe because you listened when so many ignored the whispers of truth. I will never forget that. If ever you need sanctuary or assistance across any border, you need only write. Claire Dubois. Tuppence pressed her lips together, touched. Tommy leaned over her shoulder. I hope she never finds out how often we end up needing sanctuary. Or assistance, Tuppence added pointedly, usually of the emergency sort. Tommy shrugged. Occupational hazard of being adventurous. Adventurous, she echoed. Is that what we are now? I prefer it to trouble magnet. She folded the letter carefully. Adventurous it is. A few mornings later, they strolled arm in arm along the Chelsea sidewalks, enjoying the brightness of shop windows and the cheerful rhythm of weekend errands. Tommy felt unusually light. No secret codes, no frantic chases, no suspicious figures lurking behind lampposts. It was almost dull. I was thinking, Tuppence began, I might visit an estate sale this afternoon. There's one in Kensington. Very promising selection. Tommy groaned. No ancient papers. Absolutely none. Tuppence patted his arm sympathetically. You worry too much. And you, Tommy said, attract ancient political documents like moths to a flame. She stopped walking, turned to him with exaggerated seriousness and said, Tommy Beresford, I give you my solemn promise. If I stumble across any mysterious parchments bearing royal seals, I will immediately turn them over to the nearest responsible adult. That, Tommy said, better be me. Not always, she teased. Albert is more responsible on certain occasions. Tommy rolled his eyes. Fine, but no cracked teacups either. No promises, she said, linking her arm tighter with his. They resumed strolling. The shops bustled with ordinary Londoners, the sort who had no idea two detectives walking past them had untangled a treasonous scandal and restored a royal line. And that was the way Tommy preferred it. Quiet victories, invisible triumphs, peaceful endings, at least for now. Tuppence smiled, lifting her face to the gentle morning light. Funny, isn't it, how a broken teacup can start an entire adventure? Tommy squeezed her hand. Then heaven help us if you ever break a plate. She laughed, a warm musical note that echoed down the street, and somewhere far across the city, in a quiet embassy office filled with morning sun, Claire Dubois finished writing yet another brief diplomatic letter. But before sealing it, she added one final line. Not official, not formal, but honest. The world is safer because you two refuse to look away. She sealed the envelope with a thoughtful smile, and in Chelsea, Tommy and Tuppence continued walking, arm in arm, hearts light, and blissfully unaware that the next great mystery was always waiting just around the corner. But for today, there was only peace, tea, a replaced teacup, and the gentle promise of ordinary life for now.